I never thought working hard would be the thing that broke me. I always believed effort fixed things. That if you showed up every day, kept your head down, and did right by the people you loved, life would eventually meet you halfway. That was the story I told myself for years. It was the story my parents raised me on. Work hard. Be loyal. Don't complain. Family comes first. Always. I'm saying this now because I didn't realize how dangerous that belief could be until it swallowed my entire life. The night everything finally fell apart, I was sitting alone in my car outside my childhood home. The engine was off. The porch light was on. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. My parents were inside, eating dinner together, laughing, living a life I had been paying for without knowing the cost. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from anger, not even from sadness. It was the kind of fear that settles deep in your chest when you realize you've been lying to yourself for a long time. I had worked 2 jobs for almost a decade, not to get rich, not to chase dreams, but to make sure my parents never struggled again. At least, that's what I believed. That night, I finally understood the truth. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. I grew up in a small, quiet neighborhood where everyone knew your name and your business. My dad worked at a warehouse. Long hours. Bad pay. Always tired. My mom cleaned houses for people who treated her like furniture. She came home smelling like bleach and regret. But she never complained. Neither of them did. They taught me early that sacrifice was love. If you were tired, you pushed through. If you were hurting, you kept it to yourself. If family needed you, you didn't ask questions. You showed up. When I was a kid, I watched my parents skip meals so my sister and I could eat. I watched my dad wear the same boots until the soles split open. I watched my mom smile through pain that should have broken her. Those images never left me. So when I got older, when I finally started making my own money, it felt natural to give it back. It felt right. It felt like my turn. At first, it was small things. Helping with bills, groceries, covering rent when times were tight. They always said thank you. They always told me not to worry. They always promised it was temporary. I believed them. After college, I landed my first full-time job. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid steady. I moved back home to save money. That was the plan. Just for a year. But then the bills came. Medical stuff for my dad's back. Car repairs. Unexpected expenses that never seemed to stop. Every time I thought things were leveling out, something else hit. That's when I picked up a second job. Night shifts. Weekends. Anything that paid overtime. I told myself it was temporary too. Working 2 jobs sounds tough, but you don't really understand it until you live it. Your body starts to forget what rest feels like. Your mind is always racing. You eat fast. You sleep shallow. You stop noticing your own exhaustion because it becomes normal. I'd wake up before sunrise, work my main job all day, grab something quick to eat, then head straight into my second job until late at night, sometimes past midnight. I'd come home and find my parents asleep on the couch. The TV still on, dishes in the sink, lights left burning. It annoyed me sometimes, but I never said anything. They deserve comfort, I told myself. They earned it. Years passed like that. 1 year turned into 5, then 7, then almost 10. I missed birthdays, skipped trips with friends, watched relationships fall apart because I was always tired, always busy, always just trying to help my family. Whenever anyone asked why I worked so much, I laughed it off, said I was hustling, said I liked staying busy. Truth was, I didn't know how to stop. My parents got used to it. The help, the money, the safety net I'd become. They stopped asking if it was okay. The first crack showed up quietly, like most truths do. I came home early one afternoon because my second job got canceled. I didn't tell anyone, just figured I'd surprise them. I walked into the house and heard my parents talking in the kitchen. My name came up. I slowed down without thinking. My mom laughed. Not a mean laugh. A casual one. She said, "He works too much. I worry about him." My dad replied, "He's young. He'll be fine. Besides, he's good at it." Something about that stuck with me. Good at it. Like working myself into the ground was a skill. I brushed it off. I always did. That's the thing about denial. It feels like peace until it suddenly doesn't. By the time I turned 35, my life felt small. Not because I lacked things, but because I lacked space. Everything revolved around work and family obligations. There was no room left for me. I started feeling tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Not just physically, emotionally. Still, I kept going. Until the night, I found out something I wasn't supposed to know. It happened by accident. the way big truths often do. I was organizing paperwork for my dad. Bills, insurance, bank statements. Stuff he said stressed him out. That's when I saw it. An account I didn't recognize. Savings. A lot of savings. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a retirement fund I didn't know about. But the dates didn't match. The deposits were recent. Very recent. And large. My stomach tightened. I kept digging. I shouldn't have. But I did. What I found changed how I saw everything. I sat there staring at the numbers, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Money I had sent. Money I had earned through sleepless nights and missed years. Money I thought was keeping the lights on. They weren't struggling anymore. They hadn't been for a long time. They were comfortable. And they never told me. I didn't confront them right away. I couldn't. I needed time to breathe. To think. To understand what this meant. That night, I sat in my car outside the house. The same house I'd paid for. The same porch light glowing like nothing was wrong. Inside, my parents laughed over dinner. Outside, everything I believed was falling apart. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. The soft hum of the refrigerator. The ticking clock in the hallway. Sounds I had known my whole life. But suddenly, they felt foreign. Like I was a guest in a place I thought I owned. My mind kept circling the same question. How long? How long had they been okay without telling me? How long had I been killing myself for a problem that no longer existed? I didn't want to believe it was intentional. That word felt too sharp, too cruel for the people who raised me. So I told myself there must be an explanation. A good one. There always was before. The next morning, I woke up early out of habit. 5:30. Even though it was my day off. My body didn't know how to rest anymore. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. My dad came in rubbing his eyes. He smiled when he saw me. "You're up early," he said. "Always am," I replied. He poured himself coffee. We sat there quietly, sipping in silence like we'd done 1,000 times before. I wanted to ask him right then. Just lay the papers on the table. Point to the numbers. Say, explain this to me. But my mouth stayed shut. I looked at his hands. Rough. Calloused. Hands that once lifted me onto his shoulders. Hands that taught me how to fix a bike. Hands that shook slightly now as he lifted his mug. I couldn't do it. Not yet. I went to work later that day like nothing was wrong. Answered emails. Nodded in meetings. Smiled when coworkers joked about weekend plans. Inside, I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching myself play a role I no longer understood. Every memory felt different now. Every sacrifice replayed with a new lens. The time I skipped my own birthday dinner because my parents needed help with rent. The vacation I canceled because the car unexpectedly broke down. The promotion I turned down because it meant moving out of state. All those moments came rushing back, one after another, asking the same question. Did they really need me? Or had I just become convenient? Growing up, my parents were my heroes. That's not exaggeration. They were everything to me. My dad was quiet but steady. The kind of man who didn't talk much, but always showed up. My mom was warm, emotional, deeply caring, but also anxious. She worried about everything. Money, health, the future. I learned early that my job was to ease that worry. When I got my first paycheck as a teenager, I brought it home and handed it to my mom. She cried, not because she needed it, but because she felt proud. That moment stuck with me. The feeling of being useful, of being needed. I chased that feeling for the rest of my life. My sister moved out as soon as she could. She loved our parents, but she wanted her own life. I didn't blame her. I admired her for it. She'd call sometimes and ask how I was doing. I always said I was fine. "You work too much," she'd say. "They need me," I'd answer. She never argued, but I could hear the concern in her voice. Sometimes I wonder if she saw this coming. The house changed over the years. Not suddenly. Gradually. New furniture. A better TV. Renovations I didn't remember approving. Whenever I asked about it, my mom would wave it off. "We saved a little," she'd say. "Found a good deal." I never questioned it. Why would I? They raised me to trust them. That trust was the foundation of everything I did. Weeks passed after I found the account. I said nothing, but something in me shifted. I stopped picking up extra shifts. Stopped volunteering for overtime. Not because I was lazy, but because something inside me felt tired in a way I couldn't explain. My parents noticed. "You okay?" my mom asked one evening. "You seem distant." "Just tired," I said. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me longer than usual. That's when I realized something else. They were watching me too. One night, my mom knocked on my door. She never did that before. "Can we talk?" she asked. I sat up in bed. My heart started racing. "Sure." She sat on the edge of the bed and sighed. "You've been working less," she said gently. I swallowed. "Just cutting back." She frowned. "Why?" I looked at her. Really looked. The lines on her face. The familiar worry in her eyes. "I'm burned out," I said. She reached for my hand. "You know we rely on you." That word hit me harder than she probably meant it to. Rely. Not love. Not appreciate. Rely. "I know," I said quietly. She squeezed my hand. "We just want you to be okay." But something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. Like reassurance, not truth. That conversation haunted me. Because if they were relying on me, then why had they hidden their stability? The question wouldn't leave me alone. So I did something I had never done before. I talked to my sister honestly. We met for coffee. Neutral ground. No parents. No pressure. She asked how I was doing. I didn't lie this time. "I found something," I said. Her face changed immediately. "What kind of something?" I told her about the account, the savings, the timeline. She didn't interrupt, didn't react right away. When I finished, she stared into her cup for a long time. Then she said, "I knew it." My stomach dropped. "You knew?" "Not the details," she said. "But I knew they were okay. Better than they let on." "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at me with something like sadness. "Because you didn't want to hear it." That hurt more than anything else. She explained things I had ignored for years. The trips they took without telling me. The investments my dad casually mentioned once and brushed off. The way they leaned on me emotionally even when they didn't need help financially. "You became their safety net," she said. "And eventually, their plan." I shook my head. "They wouldn't do that on purpose." She reached across the table and touched my arm. "I don't think they meant to hurt you," she said softly. "But intention doesn't erase impact." That sentence stayed with me. After that conversation, everything felt heavier. Every request from my parents felt loaded. Every thank you felt incomplete. I started noticing patterns. How my mom's anxiety spiked whenever I mentioned moving out. How my dad discouraged me from changing jobs. How they framed my sacrifice as loyalty. "You're a good son," they'd say. I used to feel proud when I heard that. Now it felt like a chain. I tried to pull back gently. Set boundaries without confrontation. "I can't cover that this month," I said once. My mom's face fell instantly. "Oh," she said. "I guess we'll figure something out." The guilt hit me like a punch. "I'll see what I can do," I added quickly. She smiled, relieved. And just like that, the boundary disappeared. That night, I lay awake thinking about control. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that grows from dependency. From unspoken expectations. From love mixed with fear. I realized something terrifying. They didn't need me anymore. But they needed me to believe they did. The realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly. Like dawn breaking after a long night. I wasn't just supporting my parents. I was protecting their comfort at the expense of my own future. And worse, I was helping them do it. I looked at my life honestly for the first time. No filters. No excuses. I had no savings. No home of my own. No partner. No plan. Everything I had built existed inside someone else's walls. And the scariest part? I didn't know who I was without being needed. One evening, my dad asked me to sit down with him. His tone was serious. "We need to talk about something," he said. My chest tightened. I sat across from him at the table. The same table where I'd grown up doing homework. The same table where I'd handed over my first paycheck. He cleared his throat. "You've seemed off lately," he said. "Is there something you want to tell us?" I looked at him. At the man who taught me responsibility. Who taught me sacrifice. I opened my mouth. And then I closed it again. Because I wasn't ready yet. Not for the truth. Not for what would come after. That night, I realized something important. This wasn't just about money. It was about identity. About obligation. About how love can quietly turn into expectation. And once you see that line, you can never stop seeing it. The moment you start noticing manipulation, everything changes. It's not dramatic at first. There's no yelling. No accusations. Just a quiet shift in how words land and how silence feels heavier than it should. After that conversation with my dad, I became more aware of myself around them. Every sentence felt measured. Every pause felt watched. It was like living in a house where the walls suddenly leaned in closer. The requests didn't stop. They just came wrapped in softer language. My mom would mention a bill casually while cooking, not asking, just mentioning. "The electric went up again," she'd say, staring at the stove. I'd wait, count to 3, pretend not to hear. Then she'd sigh, a long one, heavy. I don't know how we're going to manage this month. And there it was. Not a request. An expectation. I always stepped in. I hated myself a little more each time I did. I started tracking everything. Not to confront them. Not yet. I just needed clarity. Every transfer. Every payment. Every emergency. The numbers made my stomach turn. Over the years, I had given them more than I had ever spent on myself. More than I had saved. More than I could afford. And the worst part? They never once asked how it affected me. One evening, I came home exhausted. Bone tired. The kind of tired that makes your thoughts slow and your chest feel tight. My mom was sitting at the table with a stack of papers. I need your help, she said. I didn't even sit down. What is it? She pushed the papers toward me. Medical bills. Not new ones. Old ones. I thought these were already paid, I said. She avoided my eyes. We had to move some money around. Something in me snapped. Not loudly. Just internally. Move it where? I asked. She stiffened. Her tone changed. Why does it matter? Because it's my money, I wanted to say. But instead, I said nothing. I paid them. Again. That night, I couldn't breathe properly. I went for a drive with no destination. Just needed air. I parked in an empty lot and sat there with the engine running. I thought about the word family. How it's used as a shield. How it's used to excuse things that would be unacceptable anywhere else. If a boss treated me this way, I'd quit. If a friend did, I'd walk away. But because it was family, I stayed. That realization scared me. The confrontation came slowly. Not planned. Not dramatic. Just a breaking point that couldn't be avoided anymore. It was a Sunday afternoon. Quiet. Calm. My parents were watching TV. I stood in the doorway, heart pounding. I need to ask you something, I said. They muted the TV. My dad looked at me carefully. What's wrong? I sat down. I found the savings account. Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Just silence. My mom's face went pale. My dad's jaw tightened. How long have you known? My mom asked quietly. That question told me everything. How long? I repeated. She looked at my dad. He looked at the floor. A while, he said. My chest felt hollow. Then why? I asked slowly. Did you keep taking my money? My mom's eyes filled with tears instantly. We didn't take it, she said. You offered. I nodded. I offered when I thought you needed it. She wiped her face. You don't understand, she said. We were scared. Of what? Of losing you. That hit me harder than I expected. They told me their version of the story. About fear. About aging. About not wanting to burden me with the truth. They said they thought I needed to feel useful. That working kept me grounded. That helping gave my life purpose. They said they never meant for it to go this far. I listened. I really did. And part of me believed them. But another part of me felt sick. So you let me work 2 jobs? I said. You watched me burn out. My dad finally looked up. You're strong, he said. We knew you could handle it. That was it. Not apology. Not regret. Just justification. I stood up slowly. I can't do this anymore, I said. My mom panicked immediately. What do you mean? I mean I'm done paying for everything. Her breathing quickened. You can't just stop. Those words echoed in my head. Can't. Like I owed them. The weeks that followed were tense. Heavy. Uncomfortable. They tried different approaches. Guilt. Silence. Sadness. My mom cried more. My dad became distant. I stayed firm. For the first time in my life. It felt like standing on shaking ground. Like I might fall at any second. But I didn't. Then something changed. My mom got sick. Not life-threatening. But serious enough. The call came late at night. I need you, she said weakly. All my boundaries collapsed in that moment. I rushed to the hospital. Sat by her bed. Held her hand. And just like that, I was pulled back in. Doctors talked. Bills stacked up again. My dad looked lost. I don't know what we'd do without you, he said. I paid. Again. And hated myself for it. But something was different this time. I was aware. I saw the cycle clearly. Crisis. Guilt. Rescue. Repeat. And I realized something terrifying. This would never end unless I ended it. That night, sitting alone in the hospital parking lot, I cried. Not loudly. Quietly. For the life I never lived. For the man I never became. For the truth I couldn't ignore anymore. The hospital smell stayed with me for days. That clean, sharp mix of disinfectant and fear. It clung to my clothes. My thoughts. My chest. Even after my mom was discharged and back home, I couldn't shake it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her lying there, small and pale, holding my hand like I was still a kid, and she was the one protecting me. Except this time, it felt backwards. I was the one holding everything together. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I didn't go back to my second job after that week. Not officially. I just stopped showing up. No call. No explanation. I knew it wasn't professional. I knew it would burn bridges. But I didn't have the energy to care. My body felt like it had finally reached its limit. Like a machine that had been running nonstop for years and suddenly overheated. I slept 12 hours one day, then barely slept at all the next. My appetite disappeared. Food tasted like nothing. I told myself it was just stress, that it would pass. It didn't. Living in that house started to feel unbearable. Not because anyone was yelling. Not because there was open conflict. Because of the silence. Every room felt heavy. Every interaction felt loaded. My mom watched me constantly, like she was afraid I might disappear if she looked away. My dad barely spoke. He stayed busy with small tasks that didn't need doing. Fixing things that weren't broken. Avoiding eye contact. It felt like we were all pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. One night, I sat alone in my room and tried to imagine my future. Not next week. Not next year. My life. The picture in my head was blank. That scared me more than anything else so far. I had spent so many years being useful that I had never asked myself what I wanted. Not seriously. Not honestly. Every decision I made had been filtered through one question. How does this help my parents? Without that question, I felt lost. I started journaling. Not because I wanted to, but because my thoughts were getting too loud. I wrote things I had never admitted out loud. I am angry. I feel used. I am scared of leaving. I don't know who I am without them. Seeing those words on paper made my chest ache. I love my parents. That was the truth. But love shouldn't feel like drowning. My sister called again. You don't sound okay, she said. I'm fine. I replied automatically. She didn't let it slide this time. No, you're not. I stayed quiet. That house is killing you, she said gently. I wanted to argue. Defend them. Defend myself. But I couldn't. She invited me to stay with her for a few days. Just to breathe. Just to get space. The idea terrified me. What if they need me? I asked. She sighed. They'll survive. That sentence felt cruel and freeing at the same time. I told my parents I was going to stay with my sister for a bit. Just a short break. My mom's face crumpled. Did we do something wrong? She asked. The guilt hit instantly. No, I said quickly. I just need rest. She nodded, but her eyes said something else. That night, as I packed a small bag, my hands shook. It felt like I was committing a betrayal, like I was abandoning them. I reminded myself it was only temporary. Still, when I closed the door behind me, my chest felt tight. Staying with my sister felt strange. Peaceful. Too quiet. She had a life. A routine. Friends. A partner. Watching her move through her days made me realize how stuck I had been. She woke up without guilt. Went to work without carrying someone else's fear on her back. Made plans without asking permission. I didn't know how to do any of that. The first morning there, I woke up and didn't know what to do with myself. No one needed anything. No one was waiting for my paycheck. I sat on the couch staring at the wall, feeling useless. That's when it hit me. I had confused being needed with being loved. The days passed slowly. I took walks, ate real meals, slept through the night. And yet, the sadness didn't lift. It settled deeper. I started feeling grief. Not just for the years lost, but for the version of myself that never got to exist. The man who might have traveled, who might have built something of his own, who might have chosen freely. I mourned him quietly. My parents called every day. How are you? When are you coming back? Everything feels off without you. Each call chipped away at my resolve. I felt torn in two. One part of me wanted to run back and fix everything. The other part whispered that fixing everything had cost me too much already. One night, I dreamed I was drowning. Not violently. Slowly. Water rising inch by inch. Everyone watching. No one noticing. I woke up gasping. That was when I finally admitted it. I wasn't just tired. I was broken. I started therapy. Quietly. Without telling my parents. Sitting in that room, saying my story out loud to a stranger, felt unreal. I kept minimizing things. They didn't mean to. They had a hard life. I chose this. The therapist listened, then said something that shook me. Choosing something once doesn't mean you consent to it forever. I sat there stunned. I had never thought of it that way. Over the next weeks, I unpacked things I had buried for years. How my parents praised sacrifice, but never rest. How guilt was used as love. How my worth had become transactional. It hurt to see it clearly. But clarity also brought relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I was exhausted. Eventually, I went back to the house. Not to stay. To talk. I sat them down at the same table where so much of my life had been given away. "I'm moving out," I said calmly. My mom cried. My dad went silent. "This isn't punishment," I continued. "It's survival." They didn't understand. Not fully. But for the first time, I didn't try to make them. Walking away didn't feel victorious. It felt like grief, but also like the first honest breath I'd taken in years. That night, alone in my new place, I sat on the floor with nothing but a mattress and a lamp. No expectations. No demands. Just me. And for the first time, I didn't feel needed. I felt real. Living alone felt strange at first. Not lonely. Just unfamiliar. The silence in my new place wasn't heavy like it was at my parents' house. It didn't press down on my chest. It didn't come with expectations. It just existed. Still, I didn't know what to do with it. I sat on the floor most nights because I hadn't bought furniture yet. A mattress. A lamp. A folding chair. That was it. I told myself I didn't deserve more yet. Like comfort had to be earned. Old habits die hard. The guilt didn't disappear when I moved out. If anything, it got louder. Every morning, I woke up with the same thought. Did I abandon them? Every night, I replayed my mom's crying face in my head. My dad's silence. I wondered if my freedom came at their expense. That thought almost pulled me back more than once. The calls started changing. At first, they were polite. Careful. How's the place? Are you eating okay? Then the tone shifted. My mom started mentioning how quiet the house felt. How hard things were without me there. My dad talked about bills more often. Not directly asking. Just talking. I felt the familiar pressure creeping back in. One night, my mom said something that knocked the air out of me. "We never expected you to leave like this." Like this. As if I had done something cruel. Something sudden. I reminded her calmly that I had been working myself into the ground for years. She went quiet. Then she said, "We thought you were happy helping us." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. I realized something important then. They weren't trying to hurt me now. They were trying to restore the old balance. The one where I gave and they received. Where everything felt stable to them. Change feels like loss when you're the one benefiting from the old system. I struggled with anger during that time. Quiet anger. Not explosive. Just simmering under the surface. I'd be cooking dinner or walking home from work, and suddenly I'd feel it. A tightness in my jaw. A heat in my chest. I hated myself for feeling angry at my parents. But pretending I wasn't angry only made it worse. So I started letting myself feel it. Without acting on it. That alone felt like progress. Therapy became my anchor. Week by week, I learned how deeply my identity had been shaped by obligation. I learned that I had been praised most when I was useful. That love had always been tied to sacrifice. No one ever told me to stop. Because stopping made everyone uncomfortable. I tried doing small things just for myself. Things that didn't benefit anyone else. I signed up for a gym. Not to punish my body. Just to move. I cooked meals I actually enjoyed. Not cheap. Not rushed. I sat in coffee shops alone and watched people live their lives. At first, it felt selfish. Then it felt normal. But healing wasn't linear. Some days, I felt strong. Clear. Certain. Other days, I felt like a fraud. Like a bad son playing pretend at independence. On those days, I almost sent money without being asked. Almost called to apologize for needing space. Almost erased myself again. The hardest part wasn't missing my parents. It was missing who I used to be to them. The reliable one. The fixer. The son who never said no. Letting go of that role felt like grieving a death. Except the person who died was me. One evening, my sister invited me over for dinner. We sat on her couch after eating, dishes still in the sink. She looked at me and said, "You're lighter." I laughed. "Feels heavier." She shook her head. "You're carrying your own weight now. That's different." I thought about that on the drive home. Maybe I had mistaken heaviness for responsibility for too long. My parents eventually asked for a meeting. Not a phone call. In person. My stomach twisted when I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant. Neutral ground. My mom looked tired. My dad looked older. We talked about small things at first. The weather. Work. Then my dad cleared his throat. "We didn't realize how much pressure you were under," he said. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. My mom cried again. She always did when things got uncomfortable. "I just miss you," she said. I took a breath. I miss you too, I said honestly. But I can't go back to how things were. That sentence felt like standing on a cliff edge. They asked what that meant. I told them. No financial support. No emergencies unless they were real emergencies. No guilt-laced requests. And most importantly, I told them I needed to be their son, not their safety net. The silence that followed was thick. My mom nodded slowly. My dad stared at the table. I didn't know if they truly understood, but I knew I had finally said it out loud. That mattered. After that meeting, things were awkward for a while. Less calls. More distance. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt rejected. I had to remind myself that boundaries don't guarantee closeness. They just make relationships honest. I started building a life in small, quiet ways. I saved money. For the first time ever. I planned a short trip by myself. Nothing fancy. Just a change of scenery. Standing on a beach alone, watching the waves roll in, I felt something loosen inside me. I didn't need to earn this moment. I was allowed to be here. There were nights I still questioned everything. Nights when I wondered if I would regret this when they were gone. That fear never fully disappeared. But neither did the truth. I couldn't sacrifice my entire life to avoid future regret. That wasn't love. That was fear wearing love's face. Slowly, I began to see myself differently. Not as a provider. Not as a fixer. Just as a man. Flawed. Learning. Trying. That felt terrifying. And freeing. One afternoon, months later, my mom called. Her voice sounded calmer. "We're okay," she said. "We figured some things out." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or sad. Probably both. After the call, I sat quietly in my apartment. I realized something then. I had stopped waiting for permission to live. That might have been the biggest change of all. Time didn't heal everything the way people like to say it does. What time did was create space. Space between who I used to be and who I was becoming. At first, that space felt empty. Like a room without furniture where every sound echoes. But slowly, it began to feel like freedom. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. My relationship with my parents settled into something unfamiliar. Less intense. Less dependent. We talked once or twice a week instead of every day. Shorter conversations. Safer topics. Sometimes it felt distant. Other times, it felt healthier. I learned that closeness built on obligation isn't closeness at all. There were moments when old patterns tried to come back. A sudden expense. A worried tone. A subtle hint. My body still reacted before my mind did. Heart racing. Hands sweating. That urge to fix everything immediately. But now I paused. I asked questions. I waited. And most of the time, they figured it out without me. That was both reassuring and painful. I realized something uncomfortable. They had always been more capable than I allowed myself to believe. My sacrifice hadn't been the only option. It had just been the easiest one for everyone involved, including me. Work changed for me too. Without the second job draining me, I started showing up differently. More present. More focused. My manager noticed. I got opportunities one never would have had before. Not because I worked harder, but because I worked healthier. That shift alone rewrote how I thought about effort. I started saving intentionally. Not out of fear. Out of respect for my future. Every dollar I put away felt like a quiet apology to myself. I wish I had done this sooner. But wishing didn't help. What mattered was that I was doing it now. Therapy dug deeper as time went on. We talked about childhood. About praise. About the way responsibility had been placed on me early and never lifted. I learned that I had been trained to ignore my own limits. That saying, "I'm tired," felt like failure. That needing help felt shameful. Unlearning that took time. There were days when grief hit me out of nowhere. I'd see a father teaching his son to ride a bike, or a man my age with kids and a home, and I'd feel this sharp ache in my chest. Not jealousy, just sadness, for the timeline I never lived. I talked about this in therapy once. The therapist asked, "What would you say to that younger version of yourself?" I thought about it for a long time. "I'd tell him he's allowed to want more," I said. That answer surprised me. My parents slowly adjusted. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but they adjusted. My mom stopped framing everything as a crisis. My dad started handling things himself again. They didn't thank me for setting boundaries. They probably never will. But they respected them. That was enough. One evening, my dad called and asked for advice. Not money. Advice. About retirement plans. About downsizing. He didn't assume I'd fix it. He asked. That felt like progress. I noticed something else changing too. My resentment softened. Not disappeared. Softened. I stopped replaying old moments as often. Stopped counting sacrifices like unpaid debts. Not because they didn't matter, but because holding on to them was keeping me stuck. I started dating again. Slowly. Awkwardly. I had no idea how to explain my past without sounding bitter or broken, so I kept it simple. I spent a long time taking care of other people, I'd say. Now I'm learning how to take care of myself. Most people understood. Some didn't. That was okay. One night, lying in bed alone, I realized something. I no longer felt guilty for resting. That was new. Rest used to feel like stealing, like I hadn't earned it yet. Now it felt necessary. Human. I went back to my parents' house for dinner months later. Not as a resident, as a guest. That difference mattered. I noticed things I hadn't before. How my mom hovered less. How my dad laughed more freely. The house felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had grown. After dinner, my mom hugged me. Not tight. Not desperate. Just warm. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. I didn't ask what she meant. I just let the words land. Driving home that night, I thought about forgiveness. Not the kind that erases the past. The kind that releases you from living in it. I wasn't there yet, but I was closer. I started building routines that belonged only to me. Morning walks. Sunday grocery trips. Evenings with music playing softly while I cooked. These small things stitched my life together. They gave my days shape. There were setbacks. Moments when old guilt flared up. When fear whispered that I was selfish. That I'd regret this someday. But fear doesn't get to decide my life anymore. I listened to it. Then I moved forward anyway. One afternoon, sitting in a park, I watched families pass by. Parents. Kids. Laughter. I felt calm. Not longing. Not regret. Just calm. That's when I knew something had shifted for real. I didn't need to be needed to feel worthy anymore. That realization didn't come with fireworks. Just a quiet sense of relief. Like setting down a heavy bag I didn't realize I'd been carrying. I thought about all the years I believed love meant sacrifice without limits. Now I understood something different. Love also means honesty. And honesty sometimes means change. I don't know exactly where my life will go from here. That uncertainty used to terrify me. Now it feels open. Possibility instead of pressure. If I've learned anything so far, it's this. You can honor your parents without erasing yourself. You can love deeply without drowning. And you don't owe anyone your entire life just because they gave you theirs. Forgiveness didn't arrive the way people talk about it. There was no moment where everything suddenly felt lighter. No deep breath followed by relief. What came instead was confusion. I wanted to forgive my parents. I really did. But every time I thought I was close, something small would pull me back. A comment. A look. A memory that surfaced without warning. It made me question myself. Was I holding on too tightly? Or was I just finally being honest about the pain? I used to think forgiveness meant letting go completely. Erasing the hurt. Acting like it never happened. Therapy taught me something different. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let the past keep making your decisions. That idea stuck with me. I didn't have to pretend everything was fine. I just had to stop letting old wounds run my life. I started paying attention to how I talked to myself. For years, my inner voice sounded like my parents. Practical, demanding, always asking what I could do better. Now, I was trying to replace it with something kinder. Some days it worked. Other days it didn't. But even noticing the difference felt like progress. I began redefining what family meant to me. Growing up, family had meant obligation, responsibility, sacrifice without end. Now, I wanted it to mean something else. Support, respect, choice. That shift wasn't easy. Because when you change the meaning of family, you change how you show up in it. My parents struggled with that. They weren't bad people. They weren't villains. They were just people who had learned survival the hard way and never unlearned it. Understanding that helped soften my anger. It didn't excuse the damage, but it explained it. We started having more honest conversations. Not deep emotional talks. Just small truths. I told my mom when something made me uncomfortable. I told my dad when I needed space. Sometimes they listened. Sometimes they didn't. I learned to accept that too. One afternoon, my mom said something that surprised me. "I didn't realize how much we leaned on you," she admitted. It wasn't a full apology, but it was closer than we'd ever been. I felt a knot in my chest loosen just a bit. At the same time, I was learning how to build chosen family. Friends who knew my story, who didn't expect me to fix everything. People who enjoyed my company without needing anything from me. That was new. And honestly, it felt awkward at first. I kept waiting for the catch. The moment when they'd ask for more than I could give. It took time to trust that relationships didn't always come with hidden costs. I noticed how differently I showed up around these people. I laughed more easily. I spoke without rehearsing. I rested without guilt. That version of me felt unfamiliar, but good. There were still nights when I lay awake thinking about my parents' future. What would happen when they were older? Sicker? Less independent? That fear never fully left. But now, instead of panic, I made plans. Boundary plans. I could help without sacrificing myself again. That distinction mattered. I talked about this with my sister once. She listened quietly, then said, "You don't have to be everything." I nodded. I was finally starting to believe that. Forgiveness began showing up in small ways. I stopped correcting my parents in my head. Stopped replaying old conversations. Stopped waiting for them to say the perfect thing. I accepted that they might never fully understand what they did. And that was painful, but it was also freeing. I realized forgiveness wasn't something I did for them. It was something I did so I could move forward without bitterness. That reframing changed everything. There was a moment that really stuck with me. I was helping my dad carry groceries into his house. A simple thing. He looked at me and said, "You don't have to do this, you know." He said it casually, without guilt, without expectation. I smiled. "I know," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. That night, driving home, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not joy, just peace. The kind that comes from alignment, from living in a way that feels true. I started thinking about my own future differently, not in terms of what I owed, but in terms of what I wanted. A home that felt safe, relationships that felt balanced, a life that didn't revolve around guilt. Those goals felt possible now. I also started forgiving myself for staying so long, for not seeing it sooner, for confusing sacrifice with love. I did the best I could with what I knew then. That had to be enough. One evening, my mom called just to talk. No crisis, no request. We talked about a TV show, about a neighbor, about nothing important. After we hung up, I realized something. We were learning how to relate as equals. Not parent and provider. Not caretaker and dependent. Just family. That shift didn't erase the past, but it gave the future a chance. I still carry the lessons with me. I notice when I start overgiving, when I feel responsible for other people's emotions. Those habits don't disappear overnight. But now I catch them, and I choose differently. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't a destination. It's a practice. Something you return to again and again, especially on hard days. I don't know if my parents ever fully forgave themselves. That's their work. Mine was learning to live without resentment, to hold compassion without losing myself. If I could say one thing to anyone listening to this story, it would be this. Love shouldn't cost you your identity. Family shouldn't require your disappearance. You're allowed to exist as your own person, even if that makes others uncomfortable. As my life slowed down, my thoughts stretched out. I had more room to think, more room to notice patterns I had never questioned before. When you're always reacting, you don't see the bigger picture. You just survive. But now that I wasn't running anymore, I started seeing where everything came from. My parents didn't wake up one day and decide to lean on me. They were raised in scarcity, in fear, in a world where security was fragile and help was never guaranteed. My dad grew up watching his own parents fall apart over money. My mom learned early that love meant giving until there was nothing left. They passed those lessons down to me without realizing it. Not through words, through behavior. I thought about how often my dad said, "You never know what tomorrow brings." How my mom worried about everything before it even happened. Those fears shaped our home. And eventually, they shaped me. Breaking a cycle doesn't look heroic. It doesn't come with applause. Most of the time, it looks like disappointing people. Saying no. Choosing discomfort now to avoid pain later. That truth hit me harder than anything else. I started asking myself questions I had never asked before. What kind of man do I want to be? What kind of son am I without sacrifice? What kind of future am I building? The answers didn't come easily, but they came honestly. I realized that if I ever had kids, I didn't want them to grow up thinking love had to be earned through exhaustion. I didn't want them to feel responsible for my happiness, or my fear, or my mistakes. That realization wasn't about blame. It was about responsibility. Mine. I started seeing how deeply generational patterns run. My grandparents leaned on my parents. My parents leaned on me. It wasn't malicious. It was learned. And learning can be unlearned. There was a moment during a family gathering that made this painfully clear. We were sitting around the table, talking casually. My aunt joked about how responsible I always was. "He's the dependable one," she said. "Always has been." Everyone nodded. I smiled politely. Inside, something shifted. That label used to feel like praise. Now it felt like a warning. I realized how dangerous it is to be known only for what you give. People stop asking who you are. They just assume you'll keep giving. After that day, I started correcting people gently. I'd say instead of accepting the label. Or, "I'm working on balance." Small changes, but meaningful ones. I also noticed how often I tried to fix other people's problems automatically. A coworker stressed about money. A friend overwhelmed by life. My instinct was to step in, offer help, solutions, time. Now I paused. I asked, "Do you want advice, or do you just want to talk?" That question alone changed everything. I learned that being supportive doesn't mean taking over. It means trusting others to handle their lives, even when it's uncomfortable to watch. My parents struggled with this lesson the most. There were moments when they slipped, moments when old fears resurfaced. But now, instead of rushing in, I stayed present without fixing. I listened, I empathized, and I let them solve their own problems. That was new for all of us. One afternoon, my mom said something quietly that caught me off guard. "I don't want you to feel like you owe us anymore." She didn't look at me when she said it. I could hear the effort in her voice. I nodded. "That means a lot," I said. And it did. We were all learning. Awkwardly. Imperfectly. Together. I spent a lot of time thinking about legacy. Not money. Not property. But emotional legacy. What gets passed down silently? Fear. Guilt. Expectation. Or freedom. I realized something else. Breaking a cycle doesn't mean cutting people off. It means changing how you show up. With honesty. With boundaries. With compassion. There were days when I doubted myself. When I wondered if I was being too rigid. Too selfish. On those days, I checked in with my body. Was I calm? Was I sleeping? Was I living my own life? The answers guided me better than guilt ever did. I started mentoring a younger coworker at my job. He reminded me of myself years ago. Eager. Overworked. Always trying to prove his worth. One day, he apologized for taking time off. "I just didn't want to seem lazy," he said. I told him something I wish someone had told me earlier. Rest isn't laziness. It's maintenance. He looked relieved. That moment stayed with me. I realized then that breaking cycles doesn't just affect your family. It affects everyone you interact with. Every time you model balance, you give others permission to do the same. I stopped glorifying exhaustion. Stopped bragging about being busy. When people asked how I was doing, I answered honestly. Pretty good. Taking it slow. Learning a lot. That honesty felt radical. I also forgave my parents a little more. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. I could acknowledge their pain without carrying it. That distinction changed everything. There was a quiet moment one evening when it all came together. I was sitting on my balcony, watching the city settle into night. Lights flickering on. Sounds fading. I felt present. Not needed. Not depended on. Just present. And for the first time, that felt like enough. I thought about the years I lost. Then I thought about the years ahead. They didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt open. Legacy, I learned, isn't about what you give away. It's about what you refuse to pass on. Fear, guilt, self-erasure. I decided those ended with me. My parents might never fully understand that choice. But understanding isn't required for change. Only commitment is. If there's one quiet truth I've learned so far, it's this. You don't break cycles by fighting your family. You break them by choosing yourself without hate. By living differently. By being brave enough to disappoint expectations that were never fair. There's a moment that comes after chaos that no one really talks about. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels quiet. That's where I found myself. Not fixing. Not running. Not apologizing for existing. Just living. My days started to feel predictable in a good way. I woke up. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I rested. Nothing about it looked impressive from the outside. But inside, it felt stable. For most of my life, stability came from being needed. Now it came from knowing I would be okay, even if no one needed me at all. That shift changed everything. I noticed how my body felt differently. My shoulders weren't always tense. My jaw wasn't constantly clenched. I wasn't bracing myself for the next crisis. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came in small moments. Laughing at something dumb on TV. Standing in line without rushing. Waking up without dread. These things used to feel impossible. I started to understand who I was beneath the role I had played for so long. Not the provider, not the dependable one, not the fixer, just a man with preferences, with limits, with wants. That discovery felt both exciting and uncomfortable. Because when you don't know who you are, obligation gives you identity. When you let obligation go, you have to build something new. I asked myself a simple question one day. If no one expected anything from me, how would I spend my time? At first, my mind went blank. Then answers started to come. I'd read more, travel a little, build a home that felt calm, invest in relationships that felt mutual. None of it sounded selfish anymore. It sounded human. My relationship with work changed again. Not just healthier, more intentional. I stopped saying yes to everything. Stopped chasing approval. I focused on doing my job well without trying to prove my worth. And something strange happened. People respected me more. Not because I sacrificed more, but because I respected myself. I also noticed how differently people responded when I stopped overgiving. Some drifted away. Others stayed. The ones who stayed were the ones who valued me for who I was, not what I provided. That was painful to realize, but necessary. My parents adjusted further with time. We settled into a rhythm that felt honest. I visited without guilt. I left without apology. We talked about real things sometimes, and small things most of the time. There was still distance, but it wasn't cold. It was healthy. One afternoon, my dad and I went for a walk. Just the two of us. We didn't talk much at first. Then he said something unexpected. I wish I had known how to stop sooner. I looked at him. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. That sentence told me everything. In that moment, I saw him clearly. Not as someone who failed me, but as someone who never learned another way. That didn't erase the pain, but it softened it. I also began thinking about purpose differently. For a long time, my purpose had been obvious. Support the family. Keep things afloat. Don't let anything fall apart. Now, without that role, purpose felt quieter, less urgent, but deeper. Purpose didn't mean sacrificing myself anymore. It meant living with intention, showing up fully, choosing honesty over comfort, modeling boundaries even when it was awkward. That felt like enough. I started volunteering occasionally, not financially, not exhaustingly, just showing up, listening, helping in small ways. It reminded me that giving can be healthy when it comes from choice, not obligation. There were still moments when fear crept in. Late at night. Quiet moments. What if they need you again? What if you regret this later? I learned to sit with those questions instead of running from them. Fear doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're doing something new. I thought about the version of myself who worked 2 jobs without rest. The one who believed love meant exhaustion. I felt compassion for him. He wasn't weak. He was loyal to a fault. And loyalty without boundaries is just self-abandonment. I didn't judge him anymore. I thanked him. Then I let him go. I noticed something else. I stopped explaining myself so much. I didn't justify my choices. Didn't over-explain my boundaries. I can't do that became enough. That used to feel impossible. Now it felt natural. One evening, sitting alone with a book I wasn't rushing to finish, I realized something important. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. Not from my parents. Not from anyone. That internal freedom felt bigger than any external success. I also thought about legacy again. Not just breaking cycles, but what I was building instead. A life where rest wasn't shameful. Where love wasn't transactional. Where worth wasn't tied to usefulness. That mattered. I imagined my future self looking back on this period. Not with regret, but with gratitude. For the courage to stop. To question. To change. The truth is, I didn't lose my family by choosing myself. I lost a version of the relationship that was built on imbalance. What remained was smaller, but real. If someone asked me now what I believe about family, I'd say this. Family is not who drains you dry. Family is who respects your limits, even when they don't fully understand them. I learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of self-trust. Knowing you'll stand by yourself even when others don't agree. That trust took years to build, but it was worth it. There are still chapters ahead I can't see yet. Relationships, possibly children, a future that isn't mapped out. That used to scare me. Now it feels like possibility. I don't need my life to make sense to anyone else anymore. It just needs to feel honest to me. That's enough. When I think back to the night I sat in my car outside my parents' house, shaking, unsure of everything, I feel a quiet sadness. But I also feel pride. Because that was the night my life changed. Not because I left, but because I finally chose to stay with myself. I spent a lot of nights thinking about the years I had given away. Not just the hours, the money, the energy, or the physical exhaustion, but the life I didn't live, the experiences I missed, the man I never allowed myself to be. It hurt, quietly, deep down, in a way that no one could see. But the pain didn't feel like a punishment anymore. It felt like a teacher, a reminder of how far I'd come. Looking back, I realized that much of my suffering came from misunderstanding love. I had equated sacrifice with loyalty, work without rest with affection, submission with respect. I had thought giving everything made me a good son, but giving everything left nothing for me. And you can't love anyone well if you have nothing left to give. I began writing letters I would never send. To my parents, to my younger self, to the life I thought I had lost. Thank you, I wrote, for making me who I am, even when it hurt. It was strange to feel gratitude for pain, but it was true, because without it, I wouldn't have learned the limits I needed to survive. I wouldn't have learned how to stop. I wouldn't have learned how to choose myself without shame. Reconciliation came slowly. It wasn't a single conversation or a dramatic apology. It was small, quiet, almost imperceptible moments of understanding. My parents started listening, really listening, to what I could give and what I couldn't. And I started listening to their fears, their regrets, their stubborn pride. We met in the middle somewhere. Not perfectly, not comfortably, but honestly. One day, my dad said something that stuck with me. I never knew how much I was asking of you, he said quietly. I thought I was protecting you. I see now I was just repeating what I knew. I didn't need to reply. I just nodded. Because I understood. Understanding doesn't erase the past. It just helps you move forward without carrying it like a weight. I also started forgiving myself in earnest. For letting it go too long. For believing their need was more important than my life. For not asking for help sooner. I realized that self-forgiveness is different from excusing. It's a recognition that you were doing the best you could at that moment, with the knowledge you had. And sometimes, that's enough. I thought about the lessons I wanted to carry forward. Boundaries aren't cruel, they're protective. Self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential. Love is not measured by sacrifice. It's measured by care, honesty, and consistency. I wanted to live by these rules, quietly, every day, not to prove anything to anyone, just to live authentically. My parents and I began to create small rituals. A weekly dinner, a call that wasn't guilt-laden, a hug that wasn't desperate. We laughed more often, not because life was perfect, but because moments of connection became intentional, not obligatory. I also started reflecting on identity, the person I thought I was and the person I wanted to be. I wasn't defined by jobs, by money, or by the weight of someone else's expectations anymore. I was defined by presence, by honesty, by choices I made deliberately, and it was freeing. The quietest transformation happened inside, not visible to anyone else, not measured by milestones or achievements. I learned to breathe, to rest, to live without the constant gnaw of guilt. I learned that life isn't a ledger. It's a series of choices, and each choice has its consequences, sometimes for you, sometimes for others, but always for your own growth. I began thinking about forgiveness in a broader sense. Not just toward my parents, not just toward myself, but toward life. Life had asked too much of me at times. Life had demanded I stretch beyond my limits. And I realized it wasn't malicious. It was necessary. Necessary to learn, to grow, to survive, and to understand. I remembered nights when I cried alone in the car, exhausted, broken, and unsure. I remembered the fear and guilt that weighed on me. And I realized those moments were shaping me. Not shaping me into a martyr, not shaping me into a caretaker, but shaping me into someone who could hold life's pain without letting it define me. There were still moments of tension with my parents. Old habits died slowly. Sometimes guilt crept in. Sometimes fear whispered that I might fail again. But now I had tools, awareness, boundaries, the ability to pause before reacting, and most importantly, the ability to recognize that their needs were not my sole responsibility. I started documenting these experiences, not for anyone else, not to explain, but to remember, to track the journey from exhaustion and submission to awareness and choice, to remind myself that growth is gradual. It's painful, it's messy, but it is always possible. I began helping others, not by giving everything, but by guiding, by showing how to navigate obligations without losing yourself, by sharing small truths learned the hard way. It was different from my old role, less draining, more meaningful, because now I could give without erasing myself. One night, I stood by the window in my apartment. The city lights stretched endlessly. I thought about all the people I had tried to protect, all the people I had served, and I realized protecting others is not the same as losing yourself. I had learned how to do both, and that knowledge changed me. I reached out to my parents after that reflection, not with expectations, not with guilt, not with apology, just presence, connection. We shared stories. We laughed. We acknowledged the past without letting it dictate the present. And in that moment, I felt a deep sense of transformation. I realized the truth I had been avoiding for years. Life is messy. Family is messy. Love is messy. And you cannot control it all. But you can control how you respond. And choosing response over reaction, that is where freedom lives. I look back one last time on the person I used to be. The one who worked 2 jobs to sustain everyone else. The one who hid exhaustion beneath smiles. The one who equated sacrifice with worth. I felt sorrow, but I also felt pride, because that person carried me here. And here, I could finally be myself. The thing about healing is that it doesn't announce itself. It comes quietly, like a shadow stretching across a wall, or the first light of dawn. I noticed it one afternoon when I was helping my dad with the yard. Not because I had to, not because I owed him anything, just because I wanted to. It felt normal, easy, not weighted with obligation. That was a small victory, the kind you can't put into words. We worked in silence for a while, raking leaves, trimming bushes, sweating under the sun. I realized that silence was no longer heavy. It didn't come with judgment. It came with presence. A mutual acknowledgement that we were here, alive, and together. My parents were different too. Not magically changed. Not perfect, but willing. Willing to respect the boundaries I had set. Willing to hear me without guilt. And that, more than anything, mattered. One evening, after dinner, my mom said something quietly. "I'm proud of how you've handled everything," she said. Even when I didn't understand. Her words weren't flashy. No dramatics. Just honest. I nodded. I thanked her quietly. It wasn't about praise. It was about recognition. Acknowledgement of effort. And that was enough. The next week, my dad called me into his office. I was tense at first, expecting criticism. Instead, he said, "I don't know how to say this, but thank you for standing up for yourself, for showing us what honesty looks like, even when it hurt." I felt a lump in my throat, because that was all I had ever wanted, acknowledgement without judgment. I began to see that reconciliation isn't about erasing the past. It's about meeting people where they are, not where you wish they were, not demanding perfect apologies or magical understanding, just noticing, listening, and moving forward. That's real. I spent a lot of time reflecting on the lessons I had learned. That boundaries are love, not rejection. That rest is necessary, not indulgent. That giving without erasing yourself is possible. And that forgiveness is for the living, not the past. Those lessons weren't just for my parents. They were for me. And for everyone I might touch in the future. I began applying them everywhere. At work, in friendships, even with strangers. I noticed a shift. People treated me differently. Not because I was better, because I was whole. I wasn't trying to prove myself anymore. And that authenticity changed everything. One evening, I sat alone on my balcony. The city lights stretched out endlessly. I reflected on my life and what it had taken to get here. I thought about the nights I cried alone in the car, the endless work, the guilt, the exhaustion. I thought about the moments I had spent running myself dry. And then I thought about the choices I had made since leaving. Choosing myself, pausing, saying no, living honestly. It all felt like survival. But not just survival, like reclaiming life. I started imagining the future in a new way. Not filled with obligations or pressure, but filled with purpose, possibility, freedom. I imagined my own home, my own rhythm, loved ones who chose to be present, not because they had to. A life built intentionally. It didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt real. My parents and I continued our small rituals. Dinner once a week, casual phone calls, moments of laughter. They still had their fears. I still had my boundaries. But now, those boundaries didn't feel like walls. They felt like bridges. Bridges built on honesty, not guilt. I realized that peace doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly. A hug without tension. A conversation without expectation. A life lived without constantly apologizing for existing. That peace is rare, and I cherished it. One night, I found myself smiling at a memory of the day I walked out. The fear, the uncertainty, the shame. And I realized I didn't regret it. Not for a second. It had been the first true act of courage in my life. Not loud, not heroic in a movie sense, just honest. And honesty had given me everything. I started thinking about my own legacy. Not in money, not in possessions, but in patterns, breaking cycles, choosing self-respect, living in a way that could teach others, silently, what's possible. I wanted my story to show that love doesn't require self-destruction, that boundaries don't mean rejection, that forgiveness isn't for the past, it's for the living. I looked at my hands, worn but steady, tired but capable, marked by years of giving and learning. I realized I was finally beginning to belong to myself. And that, more than anything, mattered. There were still challenges ahead. Life always has them. But now I had tools, clarity, boundaries, compassion. I knew I could face them, not running, not sacrificing myself, but fully present. If I could say one final thing from this chapter of my life, it would be this. Choosing yourself doesn't mean rejecting others. It means living honestly, creating space for real love, breaking cycles of pain, and trusting that life, when lived with integrity, can be gentle. I never expected the end of this journey to feel quiet. I thought it would be dramatic, full of revelations and shouting. It wasn't. It was soft, like sunlight sliding through blinds in the morning, like the last page of a long book you didn't want to end, but knew had to. I felt complete in a way I hadn't before. My parents and I reached a new rhythm. Not perfect, not painless, but real, bounded by honesty instead of fear. Love that wasn't measured by sacrifice. We could sit together, share a meal, and not talk about money. Not talk about what I owed. Not talk about what I should be doing. We talked about books, the neighborhood, TV shows, small things that mattered. And in those small things, I realized, lay the foundation of a healthier family. I started thinking about the life I had stolen from myself. The vacations I never took. The friendships I neglected. The rest I denied. At first, regret washed over me like cold water. Then I remembered something important. Regret is only useful if it teaches you how to move forward. I had spent years learning that lesson, and I wasn't going back. My sense of self settled into a rhythm I could recognize. I knew who I was, not who I had been for others. Not the always responsible, always giving version of me. Just me. And that self, for the first time, felt whole. I began to see how subtle love can be. Love doesn't always roar. It doesn't always demand. Sometimes it whispers. It's in listening, in respecting boundaries, in presence without pressure. That kind of love is rare, but it is powerful. One afternoon, my dad and I sat quietly in the living room. No words, just presence. I realized that silence no longer felt like tension. It felt like comfort, trust, peace. I could see how far we'd come. We didn't fix everything. We didn't undo the past. But we learned how to coexist without erasing each other. And that was enough. I also began noticing how the past still shaped me. Old habits, old fears, old guilt, they didn't vanish. They softened. They became reminders rather than chains. And I learned to treat them with kindness, to acknowledge them, to let them teach me instead of control me. I started thinking about the cycles I didn't want to pass on, to future children, to friends, to anyone who might look up to me. I wanted to model something different. Boundaries without guilt, love without loss, strength without self-destruction. Breaking a cycle isn't flashy. It isn't heroic, but its impact lasts. I reflected on the sacrifices I had made, the 2 jobs, the long nights, the personal dreams I set aside, and I felt pride, not in the suffering, but in the endurance, in the courage to eventually step back, to step into myself. Pain had shaped me, yes, but it had also prepared me for this life. I realized that forgiveness is layered. I forgave my parents. I forgave myself. I forgave life for being harder than I expected. Forgiveness didn't erase the past. It just allowed me to live without carrying it like a stone in my chest. And that freedom is priceless. I began nurturing my own future intentionally. Every day became a small act of care for myself. Cooking what I wanted, sleeping when I needed, saying no without shame. I realized that self-respect isn't selfish. It's essential. I also built a chosen family. Friends who loved me without expectation. Partners who shared burdens instead of shifting them entirely onto me. Those relationships felt richer than anything I had experienced before, not because they were perfect, but because they were mutual. One night, sitting quietly in my apartment, I realized the full scope of my journey. I had gone from living for others' approval to living honestly for myself. I had gone from exhaustion and fear to awareness and peace. I had gone from a life measured by duty to a life measured by presence. And in that moment, I felt something rare, deep contentment. I thought back to the countless nights of doubt, shame, and worry, the times I cried alone, the times I felt unseen and unappreciated. And I realized I wouldn't trade any of it, because each moment had taught me how to be whole. Each hardship had been a step toward freedom. I also learned a subtle truth about love. Love isn't always about giving everything. Love is sometimes about knowing when to step back, about standing firmly in your own life, and still choosing connection. That is courage. I began to see my story as something more than just survival. It was a guide, a map for anyone who had been lost in obligation, anyone who had been worn down by expectations, anyone who had forgotten how to exist for themselves. I realized that life's greatest victories often come quietly, not in recognition, applause, or approval, but in small, intentional choices that honor yourself. I thought about my younger self, the one who believed love meant endless sacrifice. I would tell him, it's okay to rest. It's okay to say no. It's okay to choose yourself without guilt. You are enough, even when you stop giving. And I finally believed it. My parents and I reached a place of equilibrium. Not perfect, not without scars, but grounded, mutual, alive. And I carried that understanding into every relationship, every friendship, every future chapter. I realized life isn't about erasing pain. It's about choosing how to move through it, about learning, about forgiving, about living. And that, I understood, is the true measure of love. In the end, I didn't just survive. I became someone who could truly live, with honesty, with presence, with boundaries, with compassion. I had learned the hardest lesson of all. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot love fully if you erase yourself. And the bravest act of love is often the one you do for yourself. I looked out at the city one last time that night. Lights flickering in the dark. Life moving on. People trying, failing, and learning just like me. I smiled. Not because everything was perfect. Not because pain had disappeared. But because I had survived it. And I had learned to live anyway.